February 16, 1962, 4 o'clock in the early hours of the morning, the city of Sheffield was quietly ensconced in the embrace of a typical British winter, marked by wind speeds of about 35 miles per hour, nothing out of the ordinary. However, by 2 hours later, these winds had escalated dramatically to a staggering 97 miles per hour, exhibiting enough force to twist and bend metal cranes as if they were made of paper. This sudden surge heralded a day that would be etched in the memories of Sheffield residents as Sheffield's second Blitz. For the brief but harrowing span of several hours that Friday morning, Sheffield was transformed into a war zone-like chaos unlike anything it had ever experienced before. 2/3 of the homes in the city were damaged, entire streets comprised of prefabricated houses were laid to waste, and tragically, for individuals lost their lives, not to bombs, but to the collapse of their own chimneys crashing through the roofs beneath which they slept. This was not merely another storm. This was the Great Sheffield Gale, a fierce and unparalleled urban wind disaster that remains the most concentrated of its kind in British history. The winter of February 1962 had, up until that point, been mild and unusually quiet, almost gentle enough to let one disregard the sharp bite of the season. While other towns in the northern regions had grappled with strong winds earlier that week, Sheffield had remained tranquil, untouched, and unperturbed. There were no warnings, no hints that anything untoward was on its way. Historically, the city had been shielded by the Pennines, a range of hills that usually deflected the worst of Britain's stormy weather. The cities of Manchester and Liverpool often bore the brunt of westerly gales, while Sheffield nestled contentedly in its valley, presumed to be safe and sheltered, or so the residents firmly believed. Yet, on that fateful Friday morning, those very hills became a harbinger of unforeseen peril. Despite the wind's familiar westward course, something extraordinary occurred high above, a temperature inversion, where warm air trapped a layer of colder air beneath it. As the wind collided with the Pennines, instead of gently maneuvering over them, it ricocheted, much like a stone skimming across water. The atmospheric pressure mounted, accelerating the air that then hurtled mercilessly into Sheffield's valleys with hurricane-like fury. This phenomenon, known as a lee wave, remains a conundrum for meteorologists, a rare and unpredictable occurrence. Remarkably, a mere 9 miles away from the epicenter, the winds were measured at a gentle 18 miles per hour, nothing more than a mild breeze. However, within the city confines, the Pennines had inadvertently become a formidable launchpad, propelling the winds to their destructive zenith of 97 miles an hour, hitting without a whisper of forewarning. At 4 in the morning, most of Sheffield's residents were soundly asleep, with the wind merely noticeable, hardly a cause for alarm. But as the clock approached 6, the atmosphere turned chaotic. Rooftops began to peel away, chimneys toppled, glass shattered onto the streets below. Families awoke abruptly to a sound reminiscent of wartime air raids, the relentless howling of wind unlike anything they had heard since the Blitz. Among the victims was 17-year-old Jack Johnson, residing in Attercliffe, who found no escape when the chimney came crashing through the roof. Shirley Hill, the wife of Reverend Colin Hill, the vicar of Brightside, was comfortably seated in her armchair when bricks thundered through the ceiling above her. Ida Stubbs, aged 57, from Crooks, perished in her bed as a chimney plummeted straight through the roof, and Beryl Dickinson, just 19, from Birdwell in Barnsley, suffered a similar fate. These 4 lives were tragically snuffed out by the very structures meant to shelter. By the time the city stirred awake at 8 that morning, Sheffield resembled a scene from its wartime past, as though it had once again endured the devastation of bombing raids. The prefabricated houses were the first to succumb, these makeshift dwellings that sprung up in the aftermath of the war as a temporary solution to the massive housing crisis caused by relentless bombing, intended to serve for only 5 years. Yet, here they stood, 17 years later, testaments to Britain's slow pace of reconstruction. Now, nature seemed determined to complete the demolition that warfare had begun. In the area of Arbourthorne, the scene was one of utter devastation. Rows upon rows of these prefabs were torn asunder. Walls came apart effortlessly, almost as if made of fragile cardboard, while roofs were snatched up by the wind, lifted clean off their supporting structures, and hurled into the gardens of nearby homes, turning them into chaotic heaps of debris. Families who had once endured the horrors of the Blitz found themselves watching helplessly as their homes crumbled in a matter of minutes. A whole street vanished in an instant, flattened into obscurity. Amidst the wreckage, bewildered people stood clutching the few possessions they had managed to salvage, a precious blanket, a cherished kettle, or even cradling their children, seeking solace in each other amidst the chaos. Over at Sky Edge, a grimly identical scenario played out. Homes designed to be temporary were shredded as if by a monstrous force, leaving countless families abruptly rendered homeless. The wider city faced a staggering blow. 100 homes were utterly obliterated, reduced to ruins. An additional 6,000 residences were stripped of their ability to shield against the elements. Roofs ripped away, windows shattered, walls cracking as if under an invisible assault. A further 70,000 homes were not spared either, sustaining varying degrees of damage. It was as if 2/3 of all domiciles in Sheffield had borne the brunt of this devastation in the span of a single, harrowing morning. However, the destruction did not discriminate against architectural lineage. Even homes that had stood proudly for 100 years fell victim. The venerable Victorian terraces, with their characteristic brickwork, lost their once sturdy chimneys, sending bricks plummeting into bedrooms and living rooms, cascading onto streets where panicked residents stumbled out, seeking refuge from the rampant destruction. In the neighbourhood of Crooks, perched atop one of Sheffield's many hills, the scene was one of utter chaos and devastation. The once bustling community faced a harsh reality as its residents were forced to evacuate after their homes became too perilous to inhabit. All the while, the relentless wind howled, seeming to mock the plight of the city's inhabitants. Over at Bramall Lane, the historic and much-loved home of the Sheffield United football team, the storm wrought spectacular destruction. A towering flood-like pylon, a monolith of metal and engineering pride, had been no match for the storm's ferocity. It lay sprawled across the pitch, a twisted mass of steel transformed into a grotesque sculpture. The devastation did not stop there. The perimeter walls at the Shoreham Street end of the stadium crumbled like sandcastles under the battering winds. In the heart of the city, the College of Technology's building site became a focal point of calamity. A colossal tower crane, well over 100 feet in height, slowly succumbed to the tempest, twisting grotesquely amidst its own scaffolding before crashing down onto the structure it had been helping erect. Those who witnessed the event could scarcely believe their eyes, describing how the crane seemed to crumple as effortlessly as a paper model being crushed by a giant hand. Near Heeley railway station, chaos reigned on the tracks as debris scattered helter-skelter. A high-speed train from London to Sheffield was hurtling down the line, each second bringing it closer to potential catastrophe. The driver's heart must have skipped a beat as he spotted the danger ahead just in time to slam on the brakes. Skidding to a heart-stopping halt barely a metre from destruction, the train was stopped, with its hundreds of passengers saved by mere seconds from what could have been a tragedy of unparalleled magnitude. Across Sheffield, the city's infrastructure crumbled under the storm's relentless assault. Power lines snapped like brittle twigs, plunging neighbourhoods into an unforgiving blackout. Families, now without electricity or heat and left vulnerable with roofs ripped away and windows shattered, huddled together in the icy dark. The howling wind was their grim companion as it continued its assault on their beleaguered city. Emergency services were inundated with cries for help. The fire brigade, typically a bastion of rapid response, found itself swamped, with over 1,000 emergency calls pouring in within mere hours, and another 1,000 still waiting in dire anticipation. Phone lines, under the strain of desperation, choked with constant busy signals, while switchboards buzzed helplessly, unable to cope with ceaseless pleas for assistance. Yet, amidst this pandemonium, the gallant police and firefighting forces persevered. They moved through treacherous conditions, dodging falling debris and chimney pots flung like missiles by the wind. Glass cascaded down from broken windows, and roof tiles spun chaotically through the air. Undeterred, they pressed on, rescuing individuals from collapsed homes, evacuating families from the brink of disaster, and assessing buildings teetering on the edge of ruin. At the Jessup Hospital for Women, an air of desperation hung thick. The sudden failure of power thrust a 2-day-old infant in an incubator into grave peril, as the loss of heat and electricity put the tiny life in jeopardy. Emergency generators, hurriedly brought in, throbbed to life, restoring vital incubator conditions just in the nick of time. It was a close call, too close, but the determined effort meant the baby survived. By the time midday arrived, the storm's fury finally began to abate. The wind slackened, not coming to a halt but reducing their bullying to a mere bluster. In the ghastly aftermath, Sheffield began the painstaking task of taking stock. The extent of the calamity was undeniable, compelling the government to declare a state of emergency. The city had the dubious distinction of being the first in Britain to be officially recognised as a disaster area solely due to wind damage. Offers of aid came pouring in from across the region, with hotel proprietors as far afield as Blackpool, Cleethorpes and Morecambe generously opening their doors to the suddenly homeless, offering rooms to families stripped of their sanctuaries. Within Sheffield, improvised shelters sprang up as schools and churches welcomed those who had nowhere else to go. Hurlfield Secondary School alone took in over 120 souls, each arriving with whatever they could salvage. a bag of clothes, a solitary blanket, or sometimes barely anything at all. Among them, Mrs. East Hallam from Errington Avenue, Arbor-Thorne, arrived with her 15-year-old daughter, Pamela, and their faithful dog Rover, all their worldly possessions neatly packed into 2 weary bags. In response to the scale of the disaster, the Lord Mayor initiated a relief fund, a beacon of hope in these dark days. Generosity surged as donations quickly accumulated, with the fund soaring to £8,500 within days. Prominent companies like Whitbread and Tennant's Breweries contributed a substantial cheque for 1,000 guineas, while the Home Secretary, R.A. Butler, who also served as Chancellor of Sheffield University, sent 50 guineas alongside a heartfelt letter, underscoring the solidarity and compassion that echoed across the nation in Sheffield's hour of need. He expressed his shock at the sheer scale of the destruction that had hit the city, yet he was encouraged by the proactive spirit of Sheffield's residents as they faced the daunting challenge head-on. However, it was clear that financial resources alone wouldn't solve the predicament. The city was in dire need of skilled laborists to carry out the extensive repairs. In response, teams of builders were mobilized from neighboring cities like Birmingham and Coventry, reflecting a regional effort to aid in the recovery. These workers were temporarily accommodated at Endcliffe Drill Hall and RAF Norton, forming a sizable task force ready to engage in relentless efforts. Their mission was urgent, working tirelessly around the clock to repair and restore the rooftops, secure the boarded-up windows, and ensure the homes were weatherproof, especially with impending rainstorms threatening further damage. The weather forecast added a sense of urgency as it predicted more severe winds and heavy rainfall, and with approximately 6,000 homes already leaking, the pressure was on to complete the repairs swiftly. Insurance officers across the city witnessed an unprecedented influx of claims related to property and content damage. Long queues of anxious residents stretched down the streets, with a staggering 50,000 claims pouring in from Sheffield alone. The British Insurance Association stepped in to assess the situation, estimating the cost of the damage in Sheffield at nearly £3 million at the time, a figure that translates to over £150 million today. This was not the end of the financial toll, as the wider Yorkshire and North East region's damage costs significantly increased the overall total. Yet, an unsettling fact emerged. Half of Sheffield's damaged homes were not covered by insurance for storm-related damage. This was particularly true for properties owned by the city itself, as the Sheffield Corporation had opted to absorb the risk internally, choosing to save on insurance premiums by not covering council-owned properties against such natural calamities. Now, a heavy financial burden loomed over them, a bill they simply couldn't afford to pay. In response to the unfolding crisis, the government stepped forward with a pledge to assist, offering to match every pound raised through the public's appeal for aid. Despite these assurances, the brunt of the repairs, the escalating costs, the overwhelming responsibility, was squarely on the shoulders of the city. Yet true to its resilient spirit, Sheffield simply pushed forward. In this moment of adversity, an incredible wave of community spirit swept through the city, binding its people together in newfound camaraderie. Neighbours who had previously never exchanged a single word were now collaborating with a shared purpose. Strangers generously shared not only tools and materials but also warm cups of tea to keep the spirit alive. If your roof remained untouched by the storm's fury, you welcomed others into the shelter of your home. If you happened to have spare tarpaulin on hand, you offered it to those in need. Possessing the skill to wield a hammer meant joining the effort to repair and rebuild. By the end of February that year, a combined force comprising the Army Fire Brigade, the Civil Defence Corps, and the City Engineers Dangerous Structures Department had diligently addressed the needs of 2,200 hazardous buildings. Chimneys were reinforced and made secure, walls were propped up and stabilised, and roofs were temporarily patched. These fixes were not meant to last forever, but they served the essential purpose of keeping the relentless rain at bay. As March rolled in, it brought with it the formidable chill of one of the coldest Marches on record for the century. Snow blanketed the city, temperatures plunged, and families were left to endure these harsh conditions in homes marked by temporary repairs. They fought to remain warm amidst roofs with gaping holes and walls lined with cracks. Just when they thought they had weathered the worst, Christmas of 1962 ushered in the infamous Big Freeze. From December 26th until March 2nd, a staggering 67 consecutive days, the city was buried under a relentless cloak of snow. Sheffield, still in the process of recovering from the devastating gales, found itself ensconced in this icy grip. Nevertheless, the city refused to yield. Slowly and with great effort, it initiated the painstaking process of rebuilding. The temporary prefabricated homes that had perished in the storm were replaced, this time, with proper construction standards ensuring stability. Chimneys were thoroughly reconstructed, roofs were robustly repaired, and gradually, life started returning to a semblance of normalcy. The return period for a storm of such magnitude striking Sheffield is projected to be once every 150 years, a chilling reminder that it may occur again at any unpredictable moment, tomorrow, next year, or perhaps a century from now. The mystery and challenge lie in the fact that lee waves, a key factor in the storm, remain almost impossible to forecast. Yet amidst these uncertainties, one thing is clear. On February 16, 1962, Sheffield found itself in the throes of an unparalleled disaster, a crisis brought about by wind alone that Britain had scarcely witnessed before. For lives were tragically lost, thousands were rendered homeless, and 2/3 of the city's homes sustained damage. However, through all the turmoil, Sheffield's spirit remained unbroken. Were you there on that fateful morning? Do you recall the